This is the Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show, and I am joined with Elizabeth Miller, who is a family caregiver advocate, and she's the creator of Happy Healthy Caregiver. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me.
So I'm really curious as to why you started the Happy Healthy Caregiver. It seems like you've got quite the backstory.
Yeah, I was caring for my parents who had what they call chronic comorbidities. So lots of things going on at one time while I was working full time and raising kids. And my husband was simultaneously caring for his mom. We just felt really lost, isolated, confused, annoyed, frustrated, resentful, all of the feelings, and really felt like nobody was talking about it and that nobody was really seeing us. We felt invisible, I guess you could say, as family caregivers caring for our loved ones. And so I started, Happy Healthy Caregiver to really be that space where I wanted to support the family caregivers out there like me.
It sounds like it's almost like a thankless job where you're looking after people full time, and it can seem like you're never having the time for yourself.
Yeah, I had definitely experienced caregiver burnout, Michael, and, didn't got to the point where I didn't recognize who I was in the mirror. I normally as a very, optimistic person, happy-go-lucky, and it just really felt like people could just barely talk to me and I could burst into tears at a moment's notice. I was just, that burned out where I had refocused all of my attention on my parents and my kids and my job and really kind of put my own health and happiness to the wayside. So really had to figure out how to claw my way back to feeling like a happy and healthy person again and adjusting my mindset so that I believed that I could be a happy and healthy individual, amazing caregiver, a good mom, a good wife, and an employee as well. And it took a lot of intention to get to that point.
Share a little bit, if you can, about what it's like. So for people that are unsure, for people that simply don't know, what is it like to be a caregiver, and why is it such a difficult, I guess, career path or hobby that becomes this thing that can almost take over your life?
Yeah, well, I didn't know what I was getting into, frankly, and I think that's what happens with a lot of us is that, we're moving along in life and then all of a sudden we either see this mudslide or avalanche coming, or we have an event that happens overnight where we're suddenly thrust into a care situation. And, for me, I was in my early 40s. There wasn't a lot of people, a lot of my friends, my parents were, I guess I was, one of six kids, so I was on the younger side. And so a lot of my friends weren't really going through it at the same time. So I hadn't really seen it up close and personal before. And, there's just so much you're learning, a whole new vocabulary. You're managing another adult who has opinions and feelings. And there's a lot of feelings of grief and loss that go along in that because you are your whole life has been uprooted and changed as a person who's caring for another person, and that person's life has also changed, and so they're grieving potentially their loss of independence and things like that. So there's a lot of emotions that go along into caregiving, and there's a lot of tasks, frankly. There's everything from maybe managing someone else's home, their finances, looking for, senior living communities if they're no longer able to age in place at home, or making modifications potentially to your place so that you can, have them live with you. So many different things and then of course the whole healthcare medical thing, you've got to research and take them to appointments and pick up medications and make sure they're taking them. And it's a lot. It really becomes a lot. And if you're already at a point, especially as a working parent, I was definitely at that point where I felt like I didn't have a lot of extra room. And so your plate is pretty full, and then you're heaping on this huge responsibility to be this primary caregiver or carer for another human being. And it's emotional and physically exhausting as well.
I wonder how you actually maintain yourself, whether it's physically or mentally, because if it's that exhausting, is it like a learn as you go process where you suddenly find that, oh, I'm suddenly tanking out and energy-wise halfway through the day, and I need to figure that out? Or is there anything that you started to do to preempt some of this?
Well, I didn't do it right at first. I had put everything into taking care of other people and got to that point where my own health was really changing. I had a face full of acne. I had gained weight. I had to increase my anxiety and depression medication. I had a panic attack. There are a lot of different things that got me to that point where I was like, okay, this has got to change. If I don't make some changes and start to prioritize my own health and happiness, it's going to be a problem. I'm going to make it worse for everybody. And I think that's what happens to a lot of caregivers is they think they can kind of put their life on hold. But what the average caregiver is a caregiver for 4.5 years. So you can't ignore your own health and happiness and not think that it's going to have repercussions of doing that. So for me, it became intentional. And before I had actually started the website, happyhealthycaregiver.com, I had started figuring, how can I be accountable? And so my husband and I first we talked and decided, when we could start to figure out where I could carve out some time for myself and he could carve out some time for himself. And so found a couple mornings a week that I could reprioritize and go work out. And that was because, I was in that mindset that was self-care, was exercising and eating well. Like that's what I needed to infuse in my life. And that is true. That is one type of self-care is physical self-care and even sleep I didn't think about until later on. But that's kind of where I started primarily. And to help myself stay accountable, I used Happy Healthy Caregiver on Instagram, where I would post one photo a day of me doing something for myself every single day, even if it was just for a couple of minutes. And so maybe it was, going for a walk while my kids are at practice or making a different food choice at a fast food restaurant or doing different things. And I think it was through that journey of doing that I started realizing that self-care was not just about the physical stuff, but it was about, how to emotionally process this, how to, socialize and get the support that I needed, how to feel like I was financially secure and all of these things. And so those are the things I talk about now in Happy Healthy Caregiver, these different 8 categories of self-care and physical being one of those 8 things, but so many more pieces go into that. And my definition of self-care has evolved over the years. Like I now say that it's anything that's going to energize me, give me peace of mind, energize me physically or emotionally, or is just pure joy. And those are the things that I'm hoping to help other family caregivers infuse in their lives now.
It must be quite a surreal moment for you when you start to find this out for yourself and you figure things out and you start to find a way of juggling all of these things together. Because I imagine it probably started, the weird cartoon parent where they're feeding everyone else, they're sorting everything else, and then they have a bite of a sandwich in between the next thing, and then they go off and do the next thing. And it just seems like they're always last, or they're always having a very,
Mm,
very small piece of the pie when everyone else has had theirs. It just seems that you're almost getting the scrapings at the end after everything else has been
yeah.
taken care of. And it must have been a surreal moment for you when things actually started to come together.
Yeah, it's a mindset shift and it did take intention. Like I knew I wasn't going to find the time for it. I had to create it. And a lot of times we hear for caregivers that they need to put the oxygen mask on themselves before helping other people, like on an airplane. And that analogy is okay, but it's not perfect. And it's kind of the way you portrayed that cartoon is for me, I needed to have a different analogy that was going to work for me on a daily basis. Because remember, we're not just on one flight. This is life. Like we're on it every single day. And it felt like this exhausting treadmill that never slowed down. And so the analogy that worked for me is feeding a nest of hungry birds and me thinking about this, grown up bird that's trying to manage all of these little squawking birds in my nest. And those represent, my job, my kids, my husband, my friends, my mom at the time who needed my attention, my home, all of the things, right, that you can't neglect for forever. But it was this kind of light bulb moment that thought, oh, wow, I'm not going to keep being able to show up for all of these little birds in my nest and help them if I don't first feed myself. And feeding myself meant more than just taking a bite of something, but feeding myself emotionally and physically and mentally in different ways. So once I made that mindset shift and really started taking steps toward putting it into action, I could tell, after a couple weeks time that it was reaping benefits. I was feeling more at peace. I was, more in acceptance. I had more energy. I had set, but it's also about things for caregivers like setting boundaries and asking for more help. And so those kinds of things also came into play where like, oh, that is self-care too. That's practical self-care so that I can make this life sustainable for me so that I'm not dreading, getting up and getting on my treadmill of life every day.
It's a very interesting point you brought up actually about trying to set boundaries and possibly some elements of scheduling or designing your day, so to speak, so then you can handle things and possibly even learn how to have this communication with people when they start to cross those boundaries and how do you do that in a safe way. And it seems like there were lots of benefits or repercussions from possibly thinking this way.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about myself in this process. And I think a lot of caregivers find that it's a life-changing process. And, I don't want to also portray it, Michael, like it was all bad. There were lots of good things that happened during caregiving. To me, obviously like the prioritizing my own self-care, what an amazing, gift that ended up being that's going to benefit me for years and years. I have continued to practice what I preach and put those things in place. But also the time, the extra time that I had with family members, perhaps I wouldn't have had that time or those conversations that I had during those moments, over coffee with my mom or sharing a meal together. And I will say my folks are deceased now and my mother-in-law's deceased, but I'm still a support caregiver for my older brother. He was born with an intellectual and developmental disability and is on the autism spectrum. So, you know, I'm still living it and trying to practice what I preach, and share with others in my caregiving role with him.
So, what are some of the main benefits? Because you often hear that once you start to look after yourself, then everyone else benefits in the oxygen mask analogy that you gave, and that if you treat it that way, then things will start to improve for them as well. It's almost like you can't really help people if you're suffering, so to speak.
Right. But you've got to kind of get to that point where you feel like it's sustainable. And I've never seen a solo caregiving situation work. And that was maybe what I've been would trying to do. And I find myself even now, like caregiving with my brother, it's like, no, Elizabeth, you need to ask for help. And you need to, those are other things that people can do, even from a distance, right? There's a lot of things that people can do geographically that are far away from us they can pay bills, they can do paperwork, they can do research, they can purchase supplies and have them sent. So thinking about getting creative. So I'd say that is a positive thing that came out of it, the creative problem solving, the diplomacy and the communication of, in a really tough situation and how to manage competing priorities, where there's lots of things flying at you and trying to discern what needs your attention on that day. And then how to kind of step away and say, okay, this can wait. And I need a time out for myself right now. And I need to kind of reboot and re-energize and refresh. Um, so all of those things. So, if people are looking to hire a family caregiver, not just in a professional caregiving capacity, but really any kind of working capacity, there are so many skills that we learn through caregiving that can be applied to many, many jobs. Advocacy, patience, customer service, like all of those things. We've had to wear many, many hats as a family caregiver.
Why would you say that this is so important? So if someone was to walk up to you in the street and say, "Hey Elizabeth, I've noticed that you're really an advocate for caregiving and looking after your health first, so then you can help others," what would be the response to the benefits? Why should people do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many benefits. I think sometimes for a family caregiver, they can't kind of get to the point of thinking, um, they're just really consumed with thinking about the other person and maybe trying to even save that other person in many ways, which coming to that point is that, you can you can help them, but they've got to meet themselves halfway. And sometimes things aren't savable, frankly. You're just doing the best that you can. And so at first, I think it's a little bit about you're going to, you're going to show up as a better caregiver with more energy, more spirit, more stories, more all of that for your person if you have your own separate things going on and you're feeding that your hobbies, your interests, and your own health and coming back in a good headspace, right? For that person. But also, I think there's a responsibility that we all have as human beings to take care of ourselves and not push the can, and the health things further down the road for somebody else to manage. And so that was certainly um, a good reason for my husband and I. We could see clearly what happened when you didn't prioritize your own health and happiness with our parents. And so we did not want things to be the same way for our kids. And that really then helped us become it. So I think we have a, financial, a social, a health responsibility to kind of stay out of the system so that the people who really, really need it can get access to the resources and the services that they need. And those of us that are capable of being happy and healthy humans, we do the best we can to be that.
Now, I know that this almost is a weird segue now, but I know that being able to be healthy implies that you're looking after yourself, and we brought up self-care earlier, and you decided to work out and prioritize yourself a little bit. What are some of the other areas that carers or caregivers can actually start to look after themselves? Are there more ways than one? What are some of the little ways that you found can help caregivers integrate it as well? Because very often I imagine knowing it is not really the problem. It's how do I actually start to implement it and integrate it into their lives as well?
That's right. I used to feel really annoyed by people, Michael, who would say, "Oh, you should take care of yourself." And if a caregiver's listening out there, they're probably finding that phrase very annoying as well. And that really got me curious, right? And that's why I started Happy Healthy Caregivers. I wanted to explore different things and share my journey on the way and maybe kind of lay that out for people to try on, just like you're building like a really fine closet of things that you want to wear in different seasons, different accessories, depending upon your mood, what activities you have going on that day, and what the world is asking of you. I think the same is true when we're putting our tools together in our closet of tools for self-care. And so for me over the years, I have found that what works for me may not work for other people, but I have found that it looks different than what it looked like before I was a caregiver. And that I've had to do a lot of what I call micro acts of self-care where I'm stacking little things in my day. So for example, it's morning time where I am right now. And so this morning I knew I've got a busy day. In fact, I've got caregiving stuff with my brother later today. And so I wanted to show up with energy, for our conversation and for the things that are being asked of me. So, got up, got myself ready. I had a coffee out on my porch because I know for me, being outside is really, really energizing for me. We talked about that energy and having that quiet time. We're going to Italy later this year, so I'm practicing Duolingo on my phone for a couple minutes, and so that is something that I feel like it's enriching me. It's what I call intellectual self-care. So doing that, and there's even like a social self-care element because some of my friends are also doing it. So we have a little, competition kind of in there to keep our streaks and so forth. So and then walking my dog. And so I think things like that, drinking water, there's so many little things I think probably that we're already doing in our day, like even brushing your teeth, right? And taking showers, like that is self-care. And so for caregivers who are listening, like it's okay if that's where you are right now, but let's recognize that you're doing what you can for yourself. And then maybe adding a little bit more little micro acts where you can to kind of expand on what you feel like is missing in your life. And there were things like that when I was deep in the throes of caregiving. Like I missed reading, for example. I'm an avid reader and found that I just couldn't pick up a book. I just didn't have the energy to pick it up. I would fall asleep at night and I was missing it. And so then I started exploring audiobooks and took me a little bit to get used to it and got some free ones from the library, which is also amazing. There's financial self-care, right? I'm saving some money going to the library and getting these audiobooks through my Libby app. And I found that I could, still do reading in that way. Like when I was driving to, like when I'm driving to go get my brother for an appointment, I can listen to an audiobook that way. So finding little things like that that you can pair together in a creative way is really where I started in these little 5, 10 minute increments.
It's fascinating that you were able to find a way to integrate these things in because I know when we first started talking about these things, it was all about, okay, well, surely you could just read or surely you could just go for a walk. And I know for caregivers, it sounds so much simpler than it actually is when you're actually trying to slot these things in because the person you're caring for might have these things as well that they're trying to slot in as well as you. And it just becomes this jigsaw puzzle of, well, there are just not enough slots in the day for these pieces.
Exactly. And I think another creative thing that people do, and I did this with my mom and I'm do it with my brother, is that finding the things that you have in common with each other that bring you joy. And there's that joy element. It's like, what are the things where almost like a Venn diagram, right? I've got my circle and they've got their circle, and where are the things that we overlap in the middle doing? And so for my family, like we love to play games. So playing cards with my mom, even sometimes, as her cognitive stuff abilities decline, we would go back to simpler games that I played with that as a kid, right? Like Connect Four and Play-Doh we would do, or adult coloring. Um, so finding those things that we could do together, other than just caregiving, I think has also made it made it interesting. So my brother, is a little bit more challenging with my brother to find commonality, but he loves to eat. And so a lot of times after our appointments, we'll go, and he loves smoked food. So we'll go and have chicken wings and have conversation there. And I can ask him questions and kind of find out a little bit about what's going on, which is social self-care for both of us. And so finding those ways is it's good. It's good. It's to bring the joy back into the focus too. And we feel guilty sometimes. I think the guilt is a natural feeling that every caregiver is going to feel, because we feel guilty because we want to be, all of these things for all of these people, but it's not realistic to think that we can just be robots and keep going and going without some kind of cost effect to that. And that's where I think infusing these little things and this joy is really essential.
You mentioned financial self-care earlier. I think we touched physical as well. Are there any more categories, any more areas that maybe caregivers are unaware of? Anything that you can speak to that maybe, oh, I didn't even realize that was a thing?
Yeah, I emotional self-care. So there's 8 categories of self-care, and I feel like when I'm talking about these I always forget one, so let me make sure I don't skip one of them. But they are we talk physical is really common. That's what we think about: sleep, eating right, working out. Emotional, though, was a big one for me. For me, it was journaling. So when I found those 2 mornings a week with my husband, I would go to a Starbucks, I would blog, and then I would go work out for a little bit and shower before work. And so carving out that time in that morning really felt energizing for me to get up a little earlier and do those things and look forward to doing them a couple times a week. But journaling was such a big part of my early journey that I wrote a journal called Just for You, a daily self-care journal that's a prompted journal written with caregivers in mind, but frankly, anybody who's looking to prioritize their self-care. So, but the other emotional things could be, uh, like the getting outside, it is emotional for me. Emotional healing could be meditation or, breathing exercises. Anything that's going to kind of calm you down and help you stay in the present is a good thing there. Financial, certainly things, you could even put thrifting, right? And financial self-care. I'm really enjoying kind of going to thrift stores recently and finding a lot of joy in that, but saving money on things that I can use around the house. But it might be bigger things like getting your own financial state in order by maybe going to an elder law care attorney and getting your own paperwork done while you're also doing your loved ones, because sometimes it's hard to push them to do it. And if you're doing it too, that makes that easier. It's like, no, we all need to do this for peace of mind. So in budgeting and things, spiritual self-care, I mean, it can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. It could be, nature can be really spiritual for people. Maybe there's another form of spirituality that speaks to them. Practical, sometimes it's getting your desk cleared off so that you can sleep at night and not feel like you're missing, dropping balls. Um, Practical could be asking for more help and doing, setting the boundaries and things like that. Intellectual, we talked about, the Duolingo I'm playing, and, words with friends, or maybe listening to this podcast or listening to my podcast is also called Happy Healthy Caregiver, where I interview other caregivers sharing their self-care strategies and what's working for them. Social self-care, so being around other people. I think we certainly saw how important that was during the pandemic, of needing to be around people. And so you can do that in many ways virtually. There's virtual support groups. I'm part of a nonprofit called daughterhood.org that offers virtual support for family caregivers I do one a month, but there's other leaders that are doing that. There's, you can sing and dance virtually. You can play games. Like, there's a lot out there available for you and for your loved one that way. Um, then professional self-care is the last one, because I think we all do have to, have a need to grow professionally in our craft in some way. So even if you're working for yourself, maybe you need to learn new skills. For me, I wear a lot of hats as an entrepreneur. I've got to, learn different things that way. But maybe it's taking a course or a class. Maybe you want to think about being growing as a professional caregiver, like getting more skills and stuff that way. Maybe it's something that eventually you could get paid to do, to take care of other people. So look at it as an opportunity to grow your skill set there. But it also, professional could be, using your time off, things that you need to have, conversations you need to have at work, maybe to poise you for the next promotion. All of those things are things that you're doing. If you look at all of those 8 categories together, and you might need certain things on certain days more than others.
I'm curious about some alternatives because when you think of the people that can't necessarily carve the time to maybe look after themselves spiritually, professionally, that sort of thing, I imagine it depends on who they're caring for, how possible that is. How would you suppose those people can start to prioritize themselves a little bit? You mentioned the micro actions, but I'm curious
Yeah.
as to what other things we could do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's, hiding in your bathroom, right, for 5 minutes a day, and just be like, I need a timeout. I got to take a little break. I'll be back in 10 minutes, and then stepping away. Maybe it's going out on your porch. Maybe it's petting your animal, and finding some connection through them. It could be phoning a friend or texting somebody or assigning somebody to say, look, I'm finding I really don't laugh a whole lot anymore. And laughter is an important part of emotional self-care. Could you be the person that when you find a funny reel, could you send that to me so that I can have a little chuckle in my day? There's a lot of different things like that, that we do have access to. So I really challenge people. And I do some caregiver coaching, but when I hear from people that they don't have the time, I will push and I will challenge, and we will look at their schedule and their routine and try to find a way that we can infuse things in little ways. I mean, it could be, an intellectual self-care could be trying a new recipe. Maybe there's something that you used to enjoy going out to eat for, and you miss it. And you're like, oh, I'm going to figure out how to make that at home. Or maybe you miss, your time with your friends and going out, but is there something that you can do where they're coming to you? Like, I recently learned how to play Mahjong, which is a great game that, having some friends over, play Mahjong, maybe your care recipient could be involved in that as well, or not. But reframing, I think the things that used to bring you joy and how you can reframe them to bring them, if you can't leave the house as much and you really feel landlocked, then what is another way that you can do that? And I think even like practical self-care for a caregiver could be, how do you simplify the life of caring for another person? Like, can you can you hire someone for 4 hours so that you have 4 hours of uninterrupted time to do something that you want to do or need to do? Could you get a mobile version of, a telehealth appointment, or a mobile doctor, mobile haircuts? Like, there's mobile everything these days. Even my mobile dog groomer, like, it saves me so much time from having to pack up my dogs and take them somewhere else and wait or go back and pick them up. Like, they're just right outside my house in a mobile van. Like, that's an amazing time saver for a caregiver. And so I think looking at everything, and everything is up for kind of tweaking, to make it more sustainable for you. And that's another, I think my keywords for today's talk are intentional and sustainable, Michael.
I completely agree with that, and I wonder if a lot of people will need to be okay with that, as in making the adjustments, making the tweaks, possibly doing things in a different way than what they'd done previously, can make things so different, so much more accessible, so much more doable, I guess, consistently as well. Like, just doing something once might not necessarily be worth considering, but being able to do things every week or every couple of days, the compound effect of that must be huge.
Yeah, it's like that saying where, when you're burned out, right? And you're trying to push this big boulder up a hill or down a hill even, like, it takes a lot of inertia, right, to get that moving. But once you get it moving again and you just start kind of tapping it along and giving it little nudges, it's so much easier to make this whole thing a part of your life, this whole system. And for working caregivers that are listening, like, we are so good at project managing at work, the things that we have to do. And if this isn't a really big emotional project, so I don't want to kind of oversimplify that. But when you're proactive about looking ahead and considering the things that might happen next, the other shoes that are going to drop, the more loss of independence from your loved one, um, how that situation is going to change, and kind of get in front of it as best that you can and be proactive versus reactive on those things. That really, really has a positive impact, where then again, you're just kind of nudging this moving boulder, and it's like, okay, today is Monday. And I think routine helps with that too. Knowing maybe there's certain days of the week that are best for doctor's appointments, or certain times of day, and kind of, you're the expert in your person and in yourself, and knowing what that looks like.
That's a very good point, actually, because you must be sometimes feeling anxious or overwhelmed as a caregiver when there's so much going on. You're managing your life and your loved one's life, or maybe somebody else's loved one's life, and it can be so difficult to slot everything in. And then you realize that sometimes you just have to focus on one thing at a time, and even that can be worrying for some people. How do you suppose they could deal with that? The idea of being overwhelmed or anxious almost all the time.
Yeah, the worry is real. That's another really valid worry. But I will say that I feel like the antidote to worry is taking action in some way. And it could be, prayer is an action for worry. Maybe that's all you can do in a certain situation is, pray about it. But there might be some other kind of an action. Maybe it's making a phone call to a therapist and talking through that. Maybe it's researching something. You're worried about somebody living alone independently. Well, can you call somebody to who goes around to help you look at senior living communities and just kind of see what's out there? I think a lot of it is so unknown that if we start to kind of unpack those layers and peel them back, there's less worry involved. But I think it's very natural, the guilt, the worry, and all of that. But then knowing that you're doing your best, taking these little bite-sized actions, and a lot of that, to your point too, it does require being organized. I think that's another great skill that caregivers learn, is organization, to stay on top of it all.
What was it like for you when you put the blog together? Because I know that was a not necessarily the first thing that you did was put the blog together. So what was it like when you realized that you could help caregivers with this once you'd started to figure it out for yourself?
Well, the blogging was really healing for me initially. And honestly, at first it was just going to be anonymous. And then I thought, this could really help people. I need to just be brave, right? And put it out there. And now there's no stopping me. My life is kind of out there through the podcast and through blogging. But I had over the years I'd layered on different things, and ultimately my goal was I wanted to resign from my corporate job so that I had more flexibility. That was what I was really after is, yes, I need to make a living, but I wanted that flexibility to care for my mom and care for my kids at the time. And it's hard. It's hard to start your own business. And blogging alone and podcasting alone wasn't going to do it. And so I created a couple products. I have the journal. I do some individual coaching, but I also knew that that wasn't going to be scalable and sustainable for me. And so that's where I have, layered things on over the year to say also, how can I reach more caregivers? Instead of them trying to find me, how can I talk and reach multiple people at a time and scale this? And that's where the professional speaking really came in, where I started. I have, four main topics that I provide to faith communities, to companies, caregiver conferences, health conferences, other events, associations. And so professional speaking about how to infuse self-care and caregiving into their life, how to make caregiving sustainable, how to be, how to rock long distance caregiving, for you and your family when you don't live near your person. So I have four topics that I share, and I really enjoy talking to people and helping those groups of people figure out how to make caregiving sustainable. And honestly, everything that I do through Happy Healthy Caregiver is something that I wish existed for me. Like, how amazing would it have been, early on to stumble on the resources and be like, oh, somebody gets it. And here are some things I can try on to help me mitigate burnout. Maybe I would have never burned out in the first place. And so that really empowers and excites me.
I wonder what are some of the lessons that you've learned as a speaker since you started? Because I imagine now you're in front of more caregivers than you were initially. Is there anything that surprised you? Is there anything that you learned that you think, oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe I thought it wasn't a big deal, but maybe now it is. What has been some big learnings for you?
Well, I think there's been lots of learnings. I think, there every caregiver situation is a little bit different. So I'm learning all of the time. Like every time I interview a caregiver, talk to a caregiver, there's some nuance that I'm, adding into my wheelhouse of knowing about and expertise. And so that part um has been great to keep learning that. And then I think, on the business side of speaking, there's been a lot of learnings there for me, is figuring out like who are the people that are going to hire me to be in these speaking roles, and then rolling with the changes of the economy. And sometimes when speaker cuts and event cuts, like that certainly has an impact on my business. And so I've had to be creative again, on as a caregiver and as a business person, on how I'm going to make a living, because I have been doing this full times for 4 years. So I resigned from my corporate job in 2021. So it took me a long time to kind of get to that point, and throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall over the years to see how I could make a real living, and help support my family while still doing what I love there. But I think I'll never be bored, Michael. There's always something to learn.
I completely agree. I imagine there's something for everyone to learn all throughout their life, I guess. I imagine there's a lot to be learned for some of the failures as well, or some of the negative things that have happened. Is there anything that would come to you or speak to you as something that didn't go how you wanted it to go, but they provided the biggest words of wisdom for you?
Well, I failed a lot as a caregiver for sure. You especially as a burned out caregiver, my patience was thinner. Your voice gets raised. You just don't show up as the person that you want to show up. So there's certainly some failures there. I don't want anyone to think that like, oh, she had it all figured out and there was no bumps in the road. My mom lived in an assisted living community. There was things that we did where we picked that first one that I learned from it, because we were looking at the aesthetics and things like that versus really looking deeper into some of the mechanics of how that community was being run. And we ended up having to move my mom into a second place. And so those were definitely some lessons learned. So there's been a lot of things in caregiving. I think I've learned quickly too, like even with my brother now, like with his disability, um, he can really kind of only process one thing at a time. So giving him a whole list of things or telling him about what the whole month's going to look like is not helpful for him, but giving him kind of one thing at a time. So adapting and learning from those kinds of things where something didn't go right. And so really unpacking, well, why didn't that go right? Or why did I get emotional about that? Was there a boundary that was being crossed or something? And then in my business, lots of failures that way. Like, my original thing was to sell products and services to individual family caregivers. And I realized very quickly that, first of all, it didn't feel great, like asking for them to pay money on top of everything else that they're doing. And so really, really then had to flip and be intent. And I knew too that couldn't be sustainable to go after individual caregivers. They're just too much. It's too much and it's just one more thing for them. And so how to find the people that will pay for my products and services on their behalf then became an intentional switch for me. So learning from these failures and kind of making adjustments, earlier this year was a rough year for speaking. Things have certainly kind of turned around, which I'm happy to see now. But initially I thought, okay, and there's always that time, do I need to update my resume and get back out there? But have learned to kind of ride these waves and have found that, I can teach and people can get their CEU credits for continuing education. And that's something that's going to be recession proof. Or associations always need content because their members are paying for their dues and they need value out of that. So have found ways to kind of pivot. And I think all of that has kind of come from being a caregiver, frankly. Like we're pivoting all the time.
Are there any last little pieces of information for caregivers that are listening? So this is in the spirit of leaving no stone unturned, Elizabeth. Is there any last parting words of wisdom for them?
I mean, I think the big thing I want them to take away is like, you can do hard things. You're a badass. You can do a lot of hard stuff, but you do not have to do it alone. And there is help and support out there once you know how to tap into it and use it. And I would love to be that resource for you, to be that person who's going to fast track you to the information that's going to help you.
And how can they reach out to you, connect with you, and do you have any websites that you could share as well?
Yeah, so I'm Happy Healthy Caregiver .com is the website, and you'll find links to a lot of the different things out there. I have a podcast as well, also called Happy Healthy Caregiver. You can search and subscribe on any of the major platforms, including Spotify and YouTube. I do a weekly newsletter, so I really encourage people to subscribe to that. And you should get a pop-up when you go onto the website for the first time. You can also find it through the drop-down menus. But every week I share something happy, healthy, and care related on that. And then I'm doing a fun thing with a couple other care influencers. We are going on the Self-Care at Sea cruise in October. So if they're looking to take a big break and they want to hang out with us and hang out with other family caregivers, what I love about that is you come for the respite that you need and leave with this community of resources and support when you go back home. And so that's a week-long cruise in October that we're planning, and you'll find information on the website. And the most social channels, I'm Happy Healthy Caregiver, so you can find me there, and would love to connect that way as well.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Elizabeth, it's been great. Thanks so much for taking the time. I've loved it, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.